radio, and on the web.
Tonight on Campaign 2008, Rudy Giuliani in New Hampshire, interviews with the New Hampshire Secretary of State, and a reporter familiar with politics there. But first, Republican presidential candidate, Representative Ron Paul of Texas. He speaks to the Robert Taft Club in Virginia about conservatism and American foreign policy. It's about an hour.
Executive Board of the Robert Taft Club. I'd like to welcome everyone. Particularly first-time members to Robert Taft events. I invite you to visit our website and see some of the interesting things we have coming on later in the year. We have some interesting things planned. Before we begin, I'd like to thank the other members of the Executive Board, Dan McCarthy and Kevin Deanna and Marcus Epstein, who actually founded the club just around a year and a half ago. And their tireless efforts are invaluable. Thank you. And I'd like to remind you that the Robert Taft Club, we're a nonpartisan group. We have many Ron Paul sympathizers amongst us, but we would certainly invite all presidential candidates to come speak at our forums. I think Giuliani would have a very interesting time. But I'd like to give a special thanks to the Ron Paul 2008 staff, particularly Amanda Lee, Jesse Benton, Jeff Frazee, and Justine Lamb, who worked with us the whole time. Thank you. I'd also like to thank, this evening would not be possible without the generous support of our patrons, particularly Peter Brimlow and the VDARE Foundation, Fernando Galaviz, and Howard Ziegermark, who all gave generously to the Robert Taft Club. I'd like to thank them. A year away from the presidential election, conservatives stand at a crossroads, especially when it comes to the issue of foreign policy. This is certainly not always the case. For 60 years, conservatives of a variety of stripes, traditionalists, libertarians, Wall Street conservatives, neocons, were able to look over some differences. This is 60, yeah. For 60 years this happened. Okay. They were able to look over some very obvious differences and able to rally around opposition to the Soviet Union. Indeed, I think one could say that the post-war conservative movement would be impossible without that foreign policy consensus. The end of the Cold War brought a host of new opportunities, but it also brought about some serious, very difficult questions that in many ways the conservative movement has been unwilling or perhaps incapable of answering, such as should the U.S. sustain the fighting force abroad, or should we withdraw and kind of bring the troops home and invest a peace dividend at home? Should we actually make considerations for the spread of democracy abroad, or spread of human rights abroad, or something like this, or to take part in humanitarian interventions? Also, what could be the role of international bodies that arose during the Cold War, such as the UN or NATO? Should these have a role to play afterward? Again, the conservative movement never answered these questions. Sometimes they would support interventions, sometimes not. Sometimes they would favor democratization, sometimes not. Certainly after 9/11, President George W. Bush has forcefully reinvented the foreign policy of the Republican Party, and by extension much of the conservative movement, to be one of active interventionary attacks. And to this he's married a visionary faith that America represents a universal system that we can export abroad. In the President's words, we are led by events and common sense to one conclusion: the survival of liberty in our land increasingly depends on the success of liberty in other lands. The best hope for peace in our world is the expansion of freedom in the whole world, or Baghdad is going to be a democracy by next Tuesday. While such sentiments might be appealing, the reality of the U.S. occupation has led a substantial majority of Americans to disapprove of the President's conduct of foreign policy and to seriously question democratization as a foreign policy rationale. In this way, conservatives have an opportunity to chart a new course. If we're going to really rethink everything, then there's no one better to turn to than Representative Ron Paul of Texas. Amen. Representative Paul was born in Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania, and graduated from Gettysburg College and Duke University Medical School. After serving as a flight surgeon in the U.S. Air Force, Paul and his wife Carol moved to Texas in 1968, where he began to practice as an obstetrician and gynecologist. And he's reportedly delivered some 4,000 babies since then. Paul first entered Congress in 1976, representing Texas' 22nd district, and he was one of only 4 Republicans to support the presidential candidacy of Ronald Reagan in that year. After leaving Congress and returning to medical practice, Paul ran for president in 1998 on the Libertarian Party ticket. And in 1997, he returned both to the GOP and to Congress, and this time representing Texas' 14th district. Recent years, Paul has been one of the most principled critics of the Iraq War and American foreign policy in general. But while Bush bashing is now pretty easy, Paul has distinguished himself by opposing the Iraq War on both strategic and constitutional grounds. And I'll cite one example. In October of 2002, Paul introduced legislation whereby Congress would officially declare war on Iraq, which it is their prerogative to do in the Constitution, and not simply authorize the president to do so. While another GOP candidate wants to check with his lawyers before making a military strike, Paul reminds us that we might want to perhaps check with the Constitution beforehand. Please help me welcome Representative Ron Paul.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Thank you very much. It's very nice to be here. I'd like to first introduce 2 members of my family here tonight. My wife is here and a granddaughter, Valerie. If you'd stand up, please. Usually when we get an invitation to speak, the instructions are find out how many people belong to an organization, how many people we should expect, and where I'm going to be and whether we can work it out. And because of the nature of the club, I expressed an interest, and they said, oh, yeah, it'll be a small group. They're academically oriented, and they want to talk about foreign policy, and they have 35 members. So I said, well, it's a small crowd, but it's close by, and I don't have to get on an airplane, so why don't I just do it? But it looks like there's more than 35 people here tonight. So it is a real delight to be here. And, you know, a lot of times I'm asked by the media what kind of pictures I have in my office, how many pictures of politicians shaking hands and all that sort of thing, because that's sort of the conventional thing to do in Washington. And I said, well, I had to think about it now. Do I have any pictures of politicians? I said, I really don't. And then I had to take it back on that, because I do have one picture, and it happens to be a picture of Grover Cleveland. And underneath it, there's a quote, and the quote is, what is it worth getting elected or reelected if you don't stand for anything? And he's one of the individuals that I've admired. And matter of fact, it was one of our sons that fixed that up for me. And I think it's a neat message, something that a few other people in Washington ought to think about on occasion. But there is another, I have pictures of the family, a lot of family pictures. And then I have pictures of economists. You know, that's really a twist for on the Hill. I have Austrian economists and several of those. But I do have one quote. And the quote comes from Robert Taft. And this too was a gift to me, and it's a large quote. It's probably the size of the picture up there, and the quote essentially says it addresses the subject of the draft. And this was something that, of course, further endeared me to Robert Taft, is the fact that he says a military draft, a draft of young people, is characteristic only of a totalitarian state and not of a free country. And I'm so delighted you have this club, and I was asking early on how old the club has been, whether it's been here for 1 year, 5 years, 10 years, or what, and I understand it's less than 2 years. And about 4 years ago, Robert Novak came to a meeting of Republican congressmen, and we got to ask him some questions. And my question to him was, what are the chances of the Taft wing of the Republican Party ever being revived again? And he was very, very negative, and his body language says, never. But it looks like there's been an anticipation. Your club has been around now for more than a year, and the message of foreign policy is now a major event going on, and especially in this campaign. So things are changing. There's a shift of attitude. I do believe that philosophy is much more important than politicians. Politicians tend too often to just reflect philosophy and ideas. And the fact that these ideas are coming together and that there's a group like you getting together and studying somebody and rallying around somebody like Robert Taft. This doesn't mean that everything Robert Taft ever said I endorse, nor probably your club, but the same way with the Constitution. I don't, certainly with the way it was written, there were some shortcomings. But my point about the Constitution is twofold. One, it was a very good document, and is a good document if we'd only follow it. It was an exceptionally a unique contract between the people and the government. But that's important. But the other part that's important is whether or not you follow it, the rule of law, and whether we ignore it or change it properly. And that's where I think we have fallen down. Over these last 100 years, we virtually have forgotten the Constitution. And the mention in the introduction, I brought up the subject of declaration of war that had nothing to do with the thought that I was supporting the war. It was brought up on International Relations Committee. The resolution to transfer power illegally to the president came up, and this was a major debate. And it was at that time, in October 2002, we went to war in 2003. And it was sailing right through, so I offered this amendment, and I said, you'll have to defeat it because I'm going to vote against my own amendment, but I'm doing this for a point. If you want to go to war, you should go to war properly, you should declare it, and everybody should be behind it, and then you should go and win it and get it over with. But we shouldn't continue to go into war as we have been since World War II, whether it's Korea, Vietnam, the Persian Gulf War, and the many other little wars that have happened, and we have just totally ignored it. Now, it was rather amazing what happened after I brought that substitute amendment up, because the chairman of the committee immediately jumped on me about, well, that part of the Constitution no longer applied. It's anachronistic now. So we just ignore it. And the ranking member at that time said that bringing up something like this is frivolous. This is just frivolous to put us through this. And they were really very annoyed because I wouldn't let it go through on voice vote. And I made everybody vote, and of course they voted not to go to war. What they did vote for was transferring illegally the power and the authority, the responsibility from the Congress to the president. And that's how we get ourselves into trouble. Now, we're in a mess. I don't think they wanted the responsibility because then they could blame the president if things went wrong. But now we're in a mess, and those who voted for it and are running for the presidency, now the big debate is on. Why did I do this? If we'd have only known this, and yes, we know there were no weapons of mass destruction, and on and on. The real debate should have occurred before the war. That's why the founders insisted to make a declaration of war and put the pressure on the people through their congressmen to make this major decision. But the fact that, the other night on the debates, the subject came up on what authority the president has under emergency conditions. And he does have it. And this was debated at the Constitutional Convention. If there's an imminent attack, I mean, if they're invading and they're coming and there's a threat and you're convinced, I think we came awfully close to that, say, when we had nuclear missiles in Cuba. But even with that threat, we didn't have to do it. All we had to do, is what Kennedy did. He called up Khrushchev and said, hey, how about bugging off? And he says, yeah, well, you take the missiles out of Turkey and I'll take them out of Cuba. They made a deal and we did it. I mean, that's what happened behind the scenes. It was pretty logical and it worked out. We didn't have to have a nuclear war. The only downside of the missiles of October is that I got a draft notice. And I was just about to finish my second year of medical training as a resident, and I got my notice, and I always tell, when I talk to my veterans at home, I tell them, I volunteered, I was in the Air Force for 5 years, which is true, but then I qualified, and I said, well, I'll qualify that a bit. I said, I got the draft notice during the missile crisis, and the draft notice said, you're going to be drafted, you're going to be sent into the Army unless you want to volunteer. If you volunteer, you can be a captain, and you can practice medicine, and you can join the Air Force. I says, I immediately volunteered. Even though at the time I was wondering about the military draft, it was years after that I developed a keen sense of resentment about the military draft. And of course, Robert Taft had a resentment to the draft for a long time before that. But that introduced me into the Air Force. It turned out it was a worthwhile experience, but I still resist compulsory service. And the reason that's an appropriate discussion today is that there's a lot of behind-the-scenes agitation for reviving the draft. We had a vote just a few weeks ago to transfer, it was symbolic, transfer some money out of selective service and put it into the Better Business Bureau, when a small business. And of course, we should have neither, but we at least have choices because it was a wash. And so the anti-draft people voted yes to transfer the money. But there were only 120 willing to not even tinker with the current system of selective service. Of course, every year since I've been back in Congress, I introduce a bill that would abolish selective service. Selective service and the draft just means the government is stating the fact that they own a certain group of individuals. And there are two things I think the government emphasizes on ownership of people. One is the income tax to prove that they own everything we earn and that we are obedient and only get to keep a certain part. And that, of course, is why I want to get rid of the income tax. And of course, the other is the selective service, and if you can draft people off and go fight undeclared war, that's a pretty bad situation. But another issue that I talk about a lot, although it's an economic issue, it's also an issue of foreign policy, and that has to do with the monetary system. We have, in the 20th century, and it looks like this century as well, we seem to be having continuous wars. And the Federal Reserve was started in 1913, and quickly thereafter we financed each and every war through the creation of new money and credit. It's a deceitful tax that is delayed, and the people later on have to pay the bills. I remember very clearly the 70s, matter of fact, it was the time when I was prompted to first run for Congress, is that we had to pay for the guns and butter of the 1960s and the fallacy of the policies that we had to get us in Vietnam. But we had to pay for it. But this idea that you can tax and then inflate to support illegal, unconstitutional, unwise military adventurism is something that could be really slowed down a whole lot if we just made sure that a secretive monetary scheme, such as what we have with the Federal Reserve, weren't able to counterfeit the money and spend it into the military-industrial complex. And therefore, ultimately, for economic, moral, constitutional reasons, as well as the support that the fiat system gives to big government, whether it's domestic or international. That's why we eventually have to really look seriously at the monetary issue, especially with the collapsing dollar as it is right now. This is related to excessive military spending overseas, and if we act wisely now, we could work our way out of this. But if we continue to do what we're doing, we're going to have an end to the system, but it won't be pleasant because runaway inflation and destruction of a currency is very, very bad. And that is the direction that we're going in. Taft in the 1950s, I really think the old right that Robert Taft represented, he was a civil libertarian in the sense that he didn't like the draft, he didn't like an attack on personal liberties, he was a free market guy, and of course he didn't want to be in NATO, and he took this position of a non-military interference, adhering to the advice of the founders. But probably the real setback was the lost election by Taft in 1952. I think that sort of put the nail in the coffin of the old right, and it looks like it's being revived just as we speak, that this is a real live effort. Even though Taft lost in 52, of course it got much worse because his voice was lost after a year. But he did have an influence to a degree on Eisenhower, although Eisenhower represented the Eastern military type of establishment. Taft had a lot of influence, and although Eisenhower put some money and some advisors into Vietnam, he did restrain himself. He took the advice and stayed away from sending the troops in there, which was negated, of course, right after Eisenhower left office, and then the military troops went in and led to a problem. But one of Taft's last speeches, after he lost the election and before he died, had to do, of course, with foreign policy and the inadvisability of getting further bogged down. He warned about it and predicted it would be catastrophic if we did go in there. So he was very perceptive. But a lot of people ask the question, you know, what if the surge would work? Would you still be opposed to this? What if this worked? And on and on. But you know, the truth is, if we're doing the wrong thing, if you're robbing a bank and you're real successful, you say, oh, it went well, nobody was killed, and we got a lot of money. I mean, so it justifies it? No, if it's the wrong thing to do and it's successful, I mean, you don't want anybody to die, but just because it's successful, you shouldn't reassure ourselves and say, oh, that's okay, it's working. We invaded Grenada, it went well, so I guess we can do this. You know, we overthrew a dictator in Panama, oh, that went well, so we can do that anytime we want. Oh, we bombed Libya, that's okay, we'll do that anytime we want. Persian Gulf War, that went pretty well, so we can do that anytime we want. But eventually, empire catches up to a country, and that's what's happening today. We cannot maintain the empire, and the message is loud and clear. The political message is very clear. Even today, we find that the three head candidates on the other side, and all of them on our side, all say that on our side they say you have to put more and more, spend more and more, and stay forever, and spread the war into Iran. But the other side isn't taking any position on it. They're not saying take everything off the table, even a nuclear first strike against Iran. They're not saying that. And now they're saying, the opposition is saying, well, we would keep troops there to 2013. You know, there's no serious intent because they do not follow it from any principled, constitutional, moral position that's just none of our business to be over there and we ought to just come home. Now, the fact that we're so much involved actually allows us an option for solving some of our problems. Because my approach is this when I'm trying to figure out how we get out of this mess that we're in. As a constitutionalist, I don't endorse the welfare state, and I don't endorse our militarism and the empire. But I don't run, let's say we didn't have a military empire, and let's say we did have a child's program for children, a medical program for children. I probably wouldn't get exercised about that and say, well, what we have to do is immediately take that away from them. Although constitutionally and economically they don't work. I mean, it'll fail. So we have a lot of people dependent on the government. You know, the retirees, Social Security, and Medicare, and now prescription drugs. To start there politically isn't going to work. You just can't go out and say, I think we heard it the other night, what we have to do in order to get our budget in shape. This is a typical Republican response. To get our budget in shape, we have to cut all this welfare. Well, it doesn't work that way. Politically, you can't work it. But if we only would change our foreign policy, which would reduce spending, it would make us safer, give us a strong national defense, remove the incentive for the radical individuals who are willing to commit suicide and come into this country and kill us. All this stuff would be reduced if we just changed our policy. But not only, the most important thing is think of the money we would save. I mean, there was one individual who did a study and added up everything conceivable related to overseas activities. And he came up with a figure close to $1 trillion a year. He expects next year it'll be over $1 trillion to maintain our empire. We have over 700 bases. We are in 130 countries. The morale of our military is down. The equipment's in shambles. And what are they doing? Are they talking about reassessment? No, they're talking about bombing Iran. I mean, it makes no sense whatsoever. But what if we changed our policy? We could cut $200 or $300 billion out of that rather quickly. We could bring our troops home. Not only neutralize the efforts that we're pursuing erroneously, in the Middle East, but what about Europe? Why don't we just come home from Europe and Korea? Don't you think it's time we came home? The only way I would indirectly support a domestic spending program that technically I wouldn't create would be if I can cut enough money. Let's say we can cut $200 billion out of the military budget. That's not the defense budget. It's the military budget. And there's a big difference. You cut 200, put 100 against the deficit, and take another 100 and put it into the areas that are so dependent. So don't put anybody out in the street. This I think is palatable. People would understand this. At the same time, if we had enough money saved from overseas, we could tide those who are retired and not capable of restoring a nest egg. They have been taught to be dependent on the system. What we could do then is and there are a few here that might just take me up on this offer. Anybody who is young and energetic and that would like to get out of the system and not pay any Social Security tax and get out of the welfare system, just get out. And economically, this is feasible. Matter of fact, the opposite is impossible. There's no way it's going to work because the national debt, which is the only thing that really counts, is going up over $500 billion a year. I believe we are in the early stages of a recession. It is going to get worse. And like I said on the debates the other night, a lot of people are already in recession. And a lot of middle-class people feel a lot poorer. And a lot of people are working very hard to just keep up. It may be that the bureaucrats in Washington and the people on Wall Street and the bankers and the people in the military-industrial complex, or if you're in the medical-industrial complex, yes, they're all doing well because they get to use that counterfeit money first. But the other people get it later, and they get the high cost of living. So we're beginning to see that. And if we don't change our way, what will happen, which has happened more times than you can count because it's been numerous times, the currency becomes destroyed when it has no backing to it and no substance to it, when it's just fiat money, when it's money created by politicians spending endlessly and they have no restraint. A destruction of a currency is very dangerous because no matter how many checks you write to the elderly, it won't work because the cost will go up much faster than the depreciation of the money. Other countries have experienced this. Mexico actually understands inflation a lot better than Americans do because they've gone through currency destruction. Of course, Germany and France and many of these other nations have experienced this. We've only experienced it once. And that was the continental dollar. And that's why the founders were so adamant. Don't do this. They advised us, stay out of entangling alliances, mind our own business, but also have this additional restraint by having only gold and silver as legal tender. And this, to me, is the only solution. There's no way that we're going to be able to finance this continuation. But we do have to change our foreign policy, and we have to adhere to the law. I think closely connected to this is the principle of national sovereignty. When I was in high school, one of my teachers was redrafted. He had been in World War II. He was redrafted and sent to Korea, and he didn't come back. But we went into Korea. Not by a transfer of power from the Congress to the president. I mean, it was acknowledged that that's what they were doing. Taft spoke out against it. Fortunately, he spoke out against it. But we went in there under a UN resolution. I mean, that's how quickly after World War II that this country was willing to go back into a war and ignore our Constitution. When we take an oath of office, when we join the military or go to Congress, we swear to uphold the Constitution against all enemies, foreign and domestic. You know, there's no... There's no country in this world, if you added up all the military power of all the countries of the world, they can't attack us. They wouldn't attack us. If they did, they would be wiped off the earth in a minute. So this whole island in a minute, a couple of minutes, but they would be wiped. They would be wiped off the earth, and they wouldn't dare do it. But the greatest threat to us today, even though all we concentrate on is attacking nations that are third world nations, basically, that have no weapons whatsoever, and we say we withstood the confrontation with the Soviets and the confrontation over Cuba. They had 40,000 nuclear warheads, and we won out on that. And yet today, we feel compelled because of our insecurity and this bulliness that we're expressing that we have to go over and attack these countries that they might get a weapon someday. And the real tragedy there is that we now are a nation known to start the war. And we've been involved before, much more so than we ever should have been, when you think of how the CIA overthrew Mossadegh in '53 in Iran, and then we installed the Shah, and we've been involved way too much secretly. But this is so blatant, this preemptive war that, well, we better start this war because someday they might start a war with us. I mean, it's endless and open. It is such a dramatic change from what is truly American and truly constitutional. And that, I don't see how that's going to exist. No wonder we have less friends in the world today. And we have lost so much credibility. And the world knows we have secret prisons, but we don't torture. We have enhanced interrogation techniques. But no torture. But we don't even know where these prisons are. But we do know that under the law today, and the Congress has rubber stamped so much of this and said that the principle of habeas corpus is no longer sacred for our country, that we should honor this. So we have slipped. The danger is by far much greater internally than externally. The domestic threat is gigantic, and so we have a tremendous task before us and what we're going to do, but I can only tell you that in the short time that I have been traveling the nation these last 10 months, I have been pleasantly surprised and very pleased. Of course, I've been fighting this battle and arguing this case for a few years, and I always figured that there will always be 30 people out there that would show up and they would be interested, and they'd be around here and there, and the remnant was very small, and that young people, yes, they liked the internet, but all they liked were video games. And but lo and behold, the message is not delivered by the greatest orator, but is the greatest message ever, and it is fantastic. So the young people are spreading the message, and this is great. Foreign policy is one of the biggest issues, if not the biggest issue. But lo and behold, I always tie the foreign policy into monetary policy and tax policy. What is astounding to me is when we go to the rallies that they're so supportive at the college campuses when I talk about the Federal Reserve, and that really amazes me. But the other day, somebody noticed, and I think they made a comment on the internet today. They said when we went to the University of Michigan after the debates, we had, I think it was our largest rally, over 2,000 students came out. And when I started talking about the Federal Reserve, somebody took out a couple of Federal Reserve notes and they started burning their money. But it's been somewhat traditional now, is more so than it used to be, that people will come up and, they'll get my signature, for what reason I don't know. But they'll come up and they'll have me sign a Federal Reserve note. And I said, okay, if I sign this, is the value going to go up or go down? They tell me it's going to go up. I said, well, if it's going to go up, I guess I'll sign. But no, it's exciting what's happening. The young people are responding very, very favorably to the message. And I promise them nothing except freedom and no freebies. That means responsibility for oneself, self-reliance, but, our right to our life, our right to our liberty, our right to pursue happiness, and our right to keep what we earn, and right to keep our fruits of our labor. And as I go about, and the young people do not seem to be turned off with this, nor others, when I say, I'm not running for this office because of the things I want to do. I'm running for this office because I don't want to run your life. I don't want to because I don't know what you want. And I don't have the authority to do, and I don't have the authority under the Constitution. So what you do with your mind, your body, your religion, and what you take into your body or into your souls, that's your business. Just don't hurt anybody else. And this, of course, means that you have freedom of choice in medicine as well. That you can have alternative medicine. You can make sure that the drug companies don't come in and over-regulate, so they can make more profits over vitamins and nutritional elements, and that we don't need the WTO to have Codex Alimentarius and all these regulations. But I also don't want to run the economy because I don't know how to run the economy. And I can tell you, everybody I have met so far in Washington, they don't know either. They don't have the vaguest idea. And those few over there who think they're experts and they know what the interest rate should be, they don't know that either. The interest rate should be set by the marketplace. So I don't know how to run the economy. I don't want to. I don't have the authority to, and it's not designated in the Constitution. And I also don't want to run the world. I don't want to run other people's lives or other people's countries. I want to encourage an environment where people can thrive and where people can travel, where people can trade, and provide a sound currency, provide a principled position of property rights, and of course reverse the trend against the government ordination of eminent domain. I mean, we need to reverse that as well. But there are so many things that you can do to improve the environment, which I think the founders were talking about. The general welfare is the environment that we want to include, to take care of. And that means a sound currency and not, a paper currency that loses its value. So if we're able to achieve victory and I don't have anything to do, I would suggest you cut my pay. Because you would have to take care of yourselves. And our problem in this country is we've lost our faith, we've lost our confidence, we've lost our understanding. For too many decades, we've been taught that the government, yes, they have to take care of people. And the other thing that has happened over the last 100 years is the division of the concept of liberty, that there's such a thing as personal political liberty and economic liberty. Why is it that in freedom of speech you can have political speech, but you don't have a right to commercial speech? Speech is speech. You know, it should be all the same. Freedom is freedom. Personal liberty is the same as economic liberty. But here we've had for decades now somebody say, oh, I believe in economic liberty, but I want to tell you what you can smoke and drink, you know, and vice versa. Liberty is one element. It has to do not with groups. It doesn't depend on what group you belong to. It depends on one thing. It depends on being an individual. And every individual has this right. And the other thing that I have noticed in the campaign, which is very encouraging, is that these concepts are really the best thing in the world to bring people together. Our crowds are very diverse and they're great because they're not confrontational. Nobody wants to tell each other what to do. Just leave me alone, you know. And economically, something major is happening, and I think the young people have figured it out. They claim they don't have a good education because of the public schools, but they've learned the arithmetic very well because they know what's being dumped on them. And I think it's the whole country is becoming aware of the fact that the government no longer can solve problems, whether they're personal problems, medical problems. They certainly didn't do a very good job when they tried to solve the problems of New Orleans. They spent $50 billion, but look at that catastrophe. Central economic planning doesn't work. And the people are realizing this, and there's no trust in the future depending on the government. And I think what the campaign has been doing and what has been happening with people like you have started clubs like this is you're starting to realize that these empty promises don't work and that the promises of liberty and dependency and the positive attitude about what people can do, you know, it's a positive message, it's a message of hope, and it's an answer. And it's not strange, it's not left-wing or right-wing, it just says people have a right to their life and their liberty. It's American. It's what has made America great. It's constitutional. It's just fantastic if we would only restart the machine, get back to the revolutionary times and pick up the pieces. It wasn't perfect back then. There's a lot of good things that come forward. The experiment on liberty has only been going on a short period of time in all of history. And in the last 100 years, we've just about dropped it. We've lost it. It's fading away. And yet, right now, I think these ideas are being revived and people are saying, you know, there is a tradition here that's worth saving. And it is the humanitarian position. The humanitarian position is a message that comes from human liberty. It does not come from authoritarian. You know, they talked about the magic that Adam Smith talked about is the invisible hand. Well, you know, unfortunately, what we have done is we've given up this invisible hand on how things work, and we've given it over to the government, and now the government is using an iron fist, and I think the American people are tired of the iron fist approach to their lives. So if we can have a decent foreign policy and a domestic policy and we respect liberty, to me this is the way you release a creative energy and you allow people then to spend their time and all their energies either wasting their lives or trying to improve themselves. And governments can't legislate virtue. We should strive for virtue and excellence and prosperity. But we should have that society that provides the greatest abundance and provides the opportunities. And yet what we have done, unfortunately, is we have given the role over to the government, that the government will make us virtuous, the government will make us wealthy, the government will divide up the wealth properly. And since we are so wonderful, we will spread this wonderful message around the world through the barrel of a gun. That has to be totally rejected. Yep. So I would close by congratulating the Robert Taft Club for your perceptiveness in starting this club a year ago or so. And look to Robert Taft, look for what his beliefs were, because he certainly was on the right track. But just as we look back at the Constitution, we can always improve on our past, we can always improve on ourselves, but we also ought to have the goal in mind. The goal ought to always be liberty. Thank you very much.
Yeah, I'll do the question part. Go grab it, yeah. It's back there. Sure. Fine. Don't worry about it. Okay. Okay, Congressman Paul has agreed to answer questions. So, but before that, I'd certainly invite anyone who hasn't gotten a drink yet, if you can maybe squeeze back there to the bar. That might be impossible. But also, Doug, we actually have some. It's kind of like this is our kind of like church. We'd like to, if you'd like to give a donation to the Robert Taft Club, there are actually some bowls down there. If you could pass this around. Right. Right. See, it's the whole. Okay, we'd appreciate it. And okay, if you can, it's best if you could get to a microphone, but if you simply can't, well, actually, I think that might just be impossible. So why don't I just take questions from the crowd, and I'll try to get to everyone, but we certainly can't be here all night. I'll get to you a second. Yes?
Ron, Richard Hines from South Carolina. Another example of radical inflation of paper money would be Confederate currency. But I wanted to just make this suggestion. I think your style has so much integrity to it. I want to give you good news. Your stock is really rising in South Carolina. I guess you know that. But I want to make one bit of friendly advice, and that is, you're from Texas, I'm from South Carolina, a lot of South Carolinians settle Texas. The next time some jackass like Huckabee turns around to you and says you're on the Al-Qaeda team, you need to say, Governor, you step outside with me after this.
I sort of like nonviolence.
Okay.
We've met a few times. I would encourage everyone to donate what they can. I actually donated my wife. I was wondering if you had given any thought to running mates.
He asked about running mates. No, I haven't gotten around to that yet. So I can't answer that any more than that. Sorry.
Okay. Okay, I'll go to you.
Hey, Dr. Paul. First of all, I just want to say I've been there for 3 years, but the question is regarding a comment made to you in the Morgan State debate. Forgive me if I quote the wrong person, but I think it was Senator Brownback. So after you finished talking about the Iraq War, he said, whether or not it was right for us to go in or constitutional, we broke it, we bought it. Do you believe there's any validity to that?
No, he asked about what about our moral obligation to rebuilding Iraq, since he was referring to Huckabee saying that we broke it. Was that Brownback? No, well, it was Huckabee. No, that we have this moral obligation to be there because we messed it up. Well, first thing is staying there won't fix it, because the longer we stay, the worse it gets. But even that is not enough for me, as tragic as it is. Now, if I could find and round up all those neocons and make them pay, I would. But you know, we just really don't have the funding, and we can't do it. One thing on the military, I am very pleased that our campaign gets more money from the military than all the other Republican candidates put together, which means that when they say we're not friendly to the troops, it's a bunch of you know what.
Congressman, I have tremendous respect for you, but I was shocked to read in a Reason magazine profile that you actually stuff earmarks into appropriation bills just like every other member of Congress, and I thought you were different, sir. You, of course, vote against the bill, but I was curious how you could justify stuffing earmarks just like every other member of Congress.
Well, okay, I think the people that are critical of that don't understand the process. Because to vote against an earmark doesn't save any money. That's the first issue. And the second issue is the spending decision goes to the executive branch, which is wrong. All spending decisions should be by the Congress. So I argue the case that the Congress should make these decisions, since voting against the earmarks won't do any good. Now, as far as making the request, you're absolutely right. I vote against them all, so I've never voted for an earmark. Because I vote against all of them. But to make the request, it's sort of like you coming and asking, for your Social Security check. I don't like the system and I want to change it, but I don't deny your access to your representative. So I think there is so much misunderstanding about this earmark. It saves no money whatsoever. It emphasizes that you want to give the power to the executive branch and take away from the responsibility of the Congress. Now, if it's wasteful, that's a different story, and most of them are, and that's why I vote against the bill. So you can't say I voted for an earmark. But I think I'm responsible for representing the people. To me, it's like taking a tax credit or tax deduction. I want to get rid of the income tax, but I'm still going to give you all the tax credits possible in order to get as much money back. So to me, it's in that category.
Yes, ma'am.
Recently, there was a resolution, the Lieberman-Carl resolution that went through the Senate. Was there a similar resolution that went through the House? And what do you think about that particular resolution?
Oh, that was the Iranian Guard as a terrorist mission. No, we haven't had a vote. But I would positively vote against that. That's just war propaganda. They're just preparing you to go to war.
Yes, sir.
Congressman Paul, you're a great civil servant, and you're a very humble public servant as well. But in that same light, obviously you're running for a presidential campaign, and you need to be able to both position yourself as the best Republican to go up against a Democrat and also contrast yourself with the current Republicans running for president. So what I was looking to see you do is for you to be able to highlight your top 3 areas in which you differentiate yourself from Hillary Clinton and or the Democratic Party.
I'd have a tough time finding anything we agree on. No, I think the war. I think, she voted for the war, and now she said she can't get the troops out until 2013, and she's not willing to take off a nuclear first strike against Iran. So I would say that there's plenty of difference there. First thing is I don't think she has the vaguest notion about monetary policy. I mean, if she does understand it, she must be a participant, in the sense that we have to keep this counterfeit machine going on. And she's a welfare statist. I mean, I don't promote any of that. I have enough compassion not to, try to work a transition program, but she wants to expand. She wants total socialized medicine. So in all those areas, there's a stark difference.
I'd like to follow up on that. What are some of the practical implications in terms of pulling out? In terms of what are you willing to leave behind, and how long exactly you think that would take?
Okay, how long would it take to get out? It takes months, and you would have to talk to the military. How fast can you do it? You can send out an order, but it can't be 24 hours. It can't be 2 weeks, but it could be in the terms of months. But if you do it correctly and they believe us, I think there would be immediate benefits. But we could turn the Navy around immediately and move away from the shores of Iran and not say we're about ready to attack you. I mean, the whole world would be different if we just changed our attitude. So there would be some immediate benefits. It would take a while, and there may be a blip upward. We don't know. But if there's more chaos, you don't blame the person that's trying to come home for the chaos. You blame the chaos on the people who went in there. They're the ones who are at fault. So.
I'll take a question here on
In terms of taking the country back from basically the bankers who have controlled us financially, how would you take steps forward in order to introduce different currencies and diversify so that we're not completely dependent upon the greenback?
That's a good question, because just like I don't want to close Medicare down in one day, I don't want to even close the, and somebody thinks I'm whipping out on this, I don't want to close the Federal Reserve down in one day. I'll take 2 or 3. No, what I would do is I would legalize the Constitution with regards to money. I mean, it is a monstrous organization because of the things I talked about. But what you could do is legalize the competing currencies in gold and silver, which means that you have to take the taxes off it. You don't have capital gains taxes on money, and you don't have. You're supposed to be able to settle your disputes in that currency and not in Federal Reserve notes. But you shouldn't have sales taxes either. Make it so that people can very conveniently, if they want to save for 20 years, they can walk in and say, am I going to save for my kids' education for 20 years with a government bond, or am I going to buy a gold-backed bond? Of course, you know, the cost of education is going to do this. Your Federal Reserve note is going to do this, and you will have, your education will go from 20 to 40, your $20,000 will go down to 5. You know, it's an absolute losing game. But gold would probably keep up and may excel, you know, the inflation of the cost of education. So that has to be legalized, and that could be done in a very undisruptive manner. It's just by legalizing competition.
I'm also from South Carolina, and Richard's right, your stock is going up there. And campaigns there, I think probably something you have in common is kind of like herding cats, libertarians and South Carolinians. And I was wondering if you've seen any of the stuff that Glenn Beck has been doing, where he says that he had you booked on a show and then he pans to an empty microphone and says that you backed out at the last second. It seems like a great opportunity for publicity. Just Monday he removed his endorsement of Giuliani, and he was asking your supporters to call in, and he wanted to know more.
I have said I'd be on his show. There was a confusion on that particular night, but I have never personally, you know, backed away from something I have promised. There was some confusion between his staff and our staff, but he's you know, on occasion is a demagogue, you know, and a few things like that. But I'm willing to go on his show, but he has been pretty discourteous. He's been pretty discourteous. But my guess in the next several weeks, I'll probably go on his show. And but it's sort of how often should I go on Bill O'Reilly's show? You know, how much is to be gained? If you know, I don't care what the questions are or what the challenges are. If they just let me give an answer. You know, but this idea that if you're giving the right, like last time I was on O'Reilly's show, I started mentioning something about history. We don't want to hear about any history about here.
Dr. Paul, you talked some about monetary policy tonight and the money-making machine and how it finances the war and etc. I was hoping you could say a quick word about the role of Social Security in the money-making machine, and also what you do to get rid of it or change it.
On Social Security?
Social Security, yes.
Well, my plan would be to tide people over, but you don't have any money unless you save it someplace. I would save it from overseas and change the foreign policy, and you could. But the transition has to start very soon. So there has to be a group of people, either those who are willing or the young people can opt out of the system and start saving on their own. But there's not going to be a magic wand. You can't just close that down either. But there's no reason, if we act sensibly, why we can't move in that direction. But there's really, you know, it is one of the reasons why the country's going bankrupt. And the Social Security isn't nearly as bad as the as the Medicare, and we're massively expanding Medicare and child treatments and medical treatments. So that's going to get a lot worse, and it's going to participate in the bankruptcy. The way we're going.
Okay, I'm going to take over here, and I would ask you to keep, I mean, we don't want to set limits or anything, but try to focus your question around foreign policy, since that's the topic at hand, yes?
Congressman Paul, it's great to be here tonight. Thank you so much for taking your time. When you become president, when you become president, have you done your committee or whatever, or the people behind you, and actual dollars of closing down the foreign bases and all of the foreign policy that you have done? To generalize the question, but to get specific with your answer, how much money will that save us, and how quickly can we pay down the $60 trillion actual debt of our nation?
Well, the debt, the future obligation is 60 or 70, but that's due to the entitlements. And that might be the biggest deal, but the only way you can work on that is change the foreign policy. But the budget on maintaining the empire is close to $1 trillion a year, and you could save half of that. You know, probably not the first year, but you know, just think if you didn't have troops in Korea. There's a lot of money there. How about Europe? What about the Middle East? You know, we have 750 bases. We have 130 countries, and other than a marine here and there and an embassy, I mean, none of that is necessary. I mean, you can save a lot. No, I haven't done a study to say that it'll be $100 billion the first year and $300 billion the next year, but we know that not doing anything, that next year it's going over $1 trillion obligation to maintain the empire.
Misspoke. I think I said 60 billion, but I meant to say 60 trillion.
60 trillion.
But just to follow through real quickly, so how quickly do you think we could get this debt paid off? You know, when you become president and we actually start implementing these policies, how quickly could that? I know it's not going to happen overnight. We can't turn a ship overnight, but surely get some kind of idea.
Well, the actual debt is $9 trillion. That is a obvious obligation, and as long as it wasn't growing economically, you wouldn't have to deal with that immediately. But the $60 trillion of entitlement obligations, you have to reverse that trend so that you can cut back on those. But that's hard to say. Depends on the mood of the country, the mood of the Congress, and the willingness to, you know, tighten their belts. I mean, if you had the ideal situation to work in transition, it would probably take at least 10 years.
Okay, let's say you ask in the blue shirt, yes.
You mentioned that there was a difference between defense spending and military spending. What exactly is that difference?
The difference between defense spending and military spending. When we spend money on military to go over and bomb Iraq, our defenses go down. We're worse off. We use up a lot of equipment, and we spend a lot of money, and soldiers get killed, and that's negative. If you spend money to defend this country, it means you're going to have a well-organized army. You might have a few submarines and a few things like this, but you don't have to have all this expenditures. Colombia would be a good example of military spending and hurting our defense as well. Nobody talks about Colombia, but we're spending billions of dollars down there, and we're very much involved in a civil war, supposedly to stop drugs, you know, and this sort of thing. But we're down there to protect oil and sell helicopters, you know, this sort of thing. But that's military spending and actually hurts our defense and helps bankrupt our country.
Yeah, I'm going to take you right now.
Hi. Yes, real quick, I'd just like to make one comment. I was a former submarine officer, and my brother right now is flying Black Hawks in Afghanistan. He reports to now wildly popular. And my question is without the counterfeit machine, without the deficit spending, and without the income taxes, what would be the major sources of revenue? I mean, we need some.
In the early years, it was a low tariff. You know, they had tariffs, and tariffs aren't necessarily good, but it's a lot better than the income tax. The different revenues, the excise taxes and all, if you get rid of your income tax right now, I understand we would still have enough revenue that would be equivalent to what we were spending 7 years ago. So there's a lot of other fees and things that they collect. You know, fees for highways, gasoline taxes, and port taxes. So a lot of money comes in into the Treasury, but the income tax is the most onerous. And it's just not unheard of. People say, well, what are you going to replace it with? You know, nothing. That's what we're going to replace it.
Okay, you in the back. Yes.
Congressman, what do you say to those people who think it's in the U.S. interest to prevent Iran from getting the bomb?
Well, I think the world would be better off if they didn't have one, but that's not our obligation. I usually talk about, you know, the Soviets had 40,000 of them, and we lived through that, and we didn't have to have a nuclear war. The Pakistanis don't belong, haven't signed the NPT, and they have nuclear weapons, and that's a very, very shaky country, and India is the same way. And it's just that we promote an incentive to get a bomb. As soon as they get one, we subsidize them. If they're threatening to get one, we want to bomb them. As soon as they get one, we run over and subsidize them. That's what we did with India and Pakistan and now North Korea. We're sending them money. So if they get one, I don't think we should get hysterical. Even if we weren't over there, even if we weren't going to retaliate, I mean, the Israelis aren't going to put up with them. You know, actually, I think they might even be more frightened of Israel if we weren't over there. You know, so I think I just think that it's just war propaganda, and they have to always have enemies to keep this agitation going. You know, the perpetual war against terrorism and Islamic fascism, and putting these troops invade another country, not realizing that's our problem of occupying foreign Muslim countries. That's where our problems come from.
Unfortunately, we can only take one more question.
Dr. Paul, when you become president and when you bring the troops back home, what about the crime against the Iraqi people? How do we make it up to the people?
Yeah, we touched on that, and that is not easy because there has been a crime. But, and like I said, I wished I could just tax and confiscate all the wealth from all the neocons and everybody who pushed us into the war and everybody that voted for the war. But you know, there is a concern about it. But it's sort of like none of you are guilty. You know, if none of you pushed for the war, so you're not guilty. I don't feel like it's morally right for me to just tax you more and more. And the example I use is that we as a people have been taxed to blow up the bridges in Iraq. Now we are being taxed to rebuild the bridges in Iraq. At the same time, our bridges are falling down. So I'm not for it, but I certainly think that if peace came to the country, which I suspect there'd be a much better chance, that our country would be more prosperous, and then we should, the most important thing they could get from us would to learn how a free market works, and they would become prosperous. If not, and we're prosperous, I think we should certainly be generous in helping them out, but I would not tax you to do it. Thank you very much.
Unfortunately, Representative Paul won't be able to answer any more questions or remain. But I would like to remind you, we're actually doing an interesting program coming up in November and December, and actually John Derbyshire is going to be there, and perhaps Charles Murray. We're going to be talking about Darwinism and conservatism, friends or foes. So that's going to be very exciting, very controversial. So I hope everyone can make it out, and I suggest you visit our website, roberttaft.org, and give lots of money to it.
Thank you. Thank you.
Yeah, it's, what? He's let's walk with him outside.
So this one's fine, I can frame it. So this one's fine, I can frame it.
Okay, very quickly.
Okay.
Outside.
Outside, okay, great.